Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Francisco Jimenez. I'm a reporter for The Monitor and MyRGV.com. I'm joined by State Representative Oscar Longoria from District 35. This is a collaboration between AIM Media, Futuro RGV, Battalion Citizens League, and League of Women Voters. Let's go and get started. Thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate the invite. Thank you very much.
First thing I want to ask you, as a state representative of District 35, what do you feel are the most valuable assets in your district?
Oh, well, that's a tough question because there's so many good assets. I think the community, the proximity that we have to the border, the people that live within the district. We have a lot of first-generation folks that come from across the border, want to better their lives. Multiple families. I mean, this is a very vibrant area. It's a good area to develop your business. Good, hardworking people, and it's a beautiful area to just call home. I mean, I was born and raised in the district. Went to school at the University of Texas. Came back, and I'm raising two little girls here, 11 and 7. So I wouldn't pick another area. I think the community is just great. It's just a good area. And I think that's probably one of the biggest assets we have, the people.
You're seeking re-election. If re-elected, what are going to be your top 3 priorities?
My top 3 priorities, I have multiple priorities, right? But I think first and foremost is community development, right? I'm a big proponent for libraries, big proponent for public parks, and those are things that I have worked at the past 10 years and make sure that a lot of these areas do get that right. I think that helps develop the community. I think that helps the young children that are in the area, develop them both through physical activity and more importantly through intellectual stuff that they can develop at the library, right? I think that's important. Of course, schools are always important, right? We have multiple schools throughout the district, whether it be public school, whether it be charter schools, but giving parents options to be able to decide on what is the best route for their child to take and giving them those options. So that's something that I always work on, public education. Another top priority is, of course, infrastructure. I mean, with all the development that we're starting to see here, we're starting to see congestions on the roads, which 10, 15 years ago, we never saw that. But now just to get from one part of the district to the other could take several hours depending on the time of the day, right? People are going to and from work. So I think that's something that we have to continue to work on. And of course, development technology, right? Making sure that we look at avenues in order to develop the infrastructure that we have for internet, high-speed internet, make sure that everyone has that. And I think it's gotten to the point where before, several years ago, that was considered more of a want or a luxury, but I think the pandemic's kind of showed us that that's a need. So making sure that those rural areas in this county have access to high-speed internet, because it is a informative tool for the people that live there, and more importantly for the children. It's something that I think that they need in order to further their education.
Looking ahead towards a potential re-election, is there a particular piece of legislation that you are looking towards sponsoring already?
At this point in time, I'm kind of seeing, what we're looking at, what the area needs. So the way I usually develop my session and kind of the way I work towards stuff is I look at the bigger issues, which you look at, statewide legislation, right? Things that can completely change the laws for the entire state. And then I look towards the local communities and look at the local bills. Many times the local bills are more important than the bigger state bills, right? Because a local city or municipality or a type of utility district may need a tweak or a change in the law that has a very direct impact on the district and of course on South Texas. So at this point what I'm doing is I'm communicating with all the local officials and seeing what's important to them and what route they want to go. Of course, something that always pops up is flooding. We've had some bad rains and we've had some bad flooding in the district. So I'm working with county officials, both from both counties, Cameron and Hidalgo, to see what we can develop in order to look at those long-term flood plans to make sure that the area is safe, having a flood through rain, or more importantly, when we get a hurricane, because we're going to have a hurricane, unfortunately. We haven't had one in a while, but it's not a question of if, it's going to be a question of when it happens.
During the 87th legislation, there was, through special sessions, through regular session, there was a bit of controversy regarding SB 1. I wanted to ask you, SB 1 deals with Texas election laws. Voters, they argued that SB 1 was needed to ensure the integrity of our elections, while Democrats, they countered with that the bill was merely a voter suppression bill. My question to you is, what's your position on the 2020 election and on SB 1?
Voter integrity is very important, right? I mean, I think we want to make sure that the people that are voting should have that right to vote and make sure that there's integrity in the election process. Unfortunately, I think, there's kind of rhetoric that, there's something severely faulted with the election process. Now, I support election integrity because I think it's incredibly important, but at the same time, you need to be able to balance that with accessibility, right? And making sure where you use the guise of election integrity, but really what you're trying to do is suppress the votes. We have an issue right now in my district specifically where there was a voter location at a respective city with high voter turnout. They've moved that, right? And the community's in an uproar, rightfully so. And if you look at the numbers, the numbers just don't justify why you would move it. Now, I get it, there's costs associated with that. So I think as a voter, and then me being as a representative, I want to make sure that there's integrity in the election process because I think that's incredibly important. But at the same time, when decisions are being made that are going to have a negative ramification on voters and making it harder for the elderly, harder for the disabled, or people of color to be able to go vote, it's something that we really have to look at a microscope. So I think it's just whenever election integrity comes up, you have to really look at it. Now, I get it. There's there's kind of idea based on a national platform that there may have been, vast election fraud or lack of election integrity. But my concern being a state representative is first and foremost my district and of course the state of Texas. So I guess it just depends, but I'm all for election integrity. I think it's incredibly important. But I definitely think you have to really look at it and balance it out because the moment you go from election integrity to suppressing the vote, you can't do that because you're really denying people their right to vote and their access to vote.
Another big topic that people seem to be talking about was the freeze of 2021 and the failure of Texas grid system. Do you feel that those issues have been addressed? And if not, how would you address those?
Okay, so I dealt with the freeze. I think my little girls, they were at the age where they finally understood what it was to not have power for an extended period of time. My house got incredibly cold, kind of like a lot of other people here in the district and of course within the state of Texas. So going into session, it was something incredibly important. I sit on the Energy Committee. We actually discussed this. We made some changes, and it was really about weatherizing these facilities that provide power, right? Because the energy system is somewhat complex, right? You have, your producers, your suppliers, and then, it kind of trickles down till you get that electricity at home. The issue that we have in Texas is several years ago. One, I think we need to keep on top of it, right? We need to make sure that we're constantly adapting. But a lot of those systems are set up for hurricane, right? Because that's kind of what we have. That is our natural disaster in Texas, flooding and hurricanes. That kind of seems to be the most prone, being so close to the coast. We weren't prepared for cold weather. Now, we addressed it. We brought a lot of the industry in, wanting to ask them what happened, what could be done differently. And I think the issue that I see is really preparing for an environment where the weather can constantly fluctuate, right? So if you prepare a system for heat, right, which is the summer, that system's not going to be prepared for frigid weather. And if you prepare frigid weather, it's not going to be prepared for heat. So there has to be a way where the industry can kind of constantly adapt and making sure that they provide service. Now, thankfully, this past couple months, we've been okay. There was rumors that the grid was going to have issues, in the summer. Did not happen because of the heat. So at this point, I think that some of the changes that were made were positive, right? But I think it's something where we just can't get complacent about it, and we just have to constantly understand that the weather is always subject to change in Texas, depending on what the area code is and depending on what time of the day it is. So it's just something that we got to keep tabs on and make sure that industry is accountable because they are providing a service, they are charging for that service, and making sure that when you pay, they're taking care of you on that end because we have a huge responsibility on them to make sure that they continue to make, the power go on, literally.
During the 87th state legislation, there was another piece of controversial legislation that was passed, which was the concealed carry legislation.
Yes.
Which basically allows anyone over 21 to open carry or concealed carry, right, without a permit or a license. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on that?
I personally have a CHL license. I'm a firearm owner. I think, it's a right, but at the same time, you have to be able to balance that between a right and a privilege, right? Now, when you kind of go on, to assault rifles, that's kind of a different category. But me personally, I'm a CHL holder. I took the class. I went ahead and obtained my license, and I think I didn't see much trouble in doing that. So, I support people owning firearms, but I just think there needs to be some responsibility, right? A couple years ago when I was in the House, we passed, through appropriations, we allocated money for gun sense and for gun safety and gun awareness, right? Because it's one thing owning a firearm, it's another thing being able how to use it and understanding, the ramifications that can result if it's used improperly and safety. So I would like for us as a legislature, just the way they push the right to own a firearm, they push the right to responsibly own a firearm. So it's kind of a give and take. I mean, the question, it's hard to answer one way or the other, right? But it's kind of like a give and take where you have to balance that out, right? I mean, there needs to be responsible gun ownership if you're going to have it. Me having my CHL, I feel that I'm a responsible gun owner. I always have it locked up. I understand that it's just there for safety reasons. I personally do not want to be walking around and having it. I think sometimes, just walking around having a weapon doesn't give the right impression to the people around you, and I think sometimes it can be dangerous.
Border security has been a hot topic both in Austin and in Washington, D.C. I believe the legislation they approved around $800 million biannually for the past several years to support border security operations. And Governor Abbott, he recently announced that the state of Texas is going to be funding a private border wall. What are your thoughts on the current state of our international border? And what kind of policies would you support that are related to border security?
Okay, look, I'm all about safety, right? And I want our community to be safe. But we also have to look at, a lot of time these individuals are crossing over, not really so much to stay here in South Texas and commit crime. They're trying to pass through and go up north and go work and better their families wherever they may be. Several sessions back, I codified the Border Prosecution Unit, and what that was there was a time, if you recall, and you've been down here about 10 years ago, where we were seeing a lot of high-speed pursuits on the expressway. There was a lot of home invasions. There was a lot of splashdowns, is what they called them at the time, where people would just go and dump bundles of marijuana. Our local city police, county, through the sheriff's department, were dealing with all this stuff, right? And then those cases were getting bogged down. Many times they had a federal component, but they weren't being picked up by the federal government because they weren't to the gamut for them to pick it up, so they were leaving it to the locals. So our district attorney's offices, throughout the southern border region were inundated with these cases. So what we did was we started the Border Prosecution Unit, the BPU, and what that does is allocate state resources to be able to prosecute these cases and either bring them to trial or ultimately get them resolved, right? And that's a state component. You see, stuff like that makes sense. Now, the border, I'm kind of the point where it's kind of a federal issue, right? That's federal jurisdiction, and they're the ones that are supposed to protect the border. And I understand, if you deem that the federal government isn't doing their job, but the silver linings on it is I told my local officials and I've told local law enforcement, well, if the state wants to double down on resources to protect the border, then that's just one less area that you need to patrol, right? Bring your units into the city. Make sure that, crime is not happening in your respective cities, and just pull back. It's a really complex issue. I try not to politicize it. I know a lot of people always come down and, make a big ordeal about the border and this is going on. But I've lived here, all my life. I mean, I tell everyone, yes, there is crime, there is illegal activity, but you'll find that in any city that you go to. I mean, you live in Houston, you can find it. You live in Austin, you'll be able to find it. So if you go look for negative criminal activity, you're probably going to find it. But I think at this point in time, I think there's issues with the border. There always is. It's constantly changing. But does it go to the ramifications, or does it merit where it's a war zone? Probably not. I mean, I have 2 little girls here that I'm raising, and I can honestly tell you, I sleep good at night. I feel very safe living here in South Texas, and I wouldn't raise them here if I thought it was a dangerous war zone. I mean, that's coming from someone that's lived here and been here all their life.
In 2021, the U.S. inflation rate was approximately 7%, which affects everybody, whether it's the cost of food, everybody's affected in some way or the other. It was 8.5% in July, which was down from a 40-year high of 9.1% in June. I think more recently in August, I believe it's 8.3%. What can the Texas legislature do to mitigate the impact of inflation on Texas residents?
Well, it's really helping them where, I guess, where can we help them? And I'll give you an example. I think property taxes. I think, there's been a lot of, push to try to do some type of property tax reform. Whether the state buying some of that down in order to give folks some kind of discount on a homestead exemption, increasing that. But we're really facing an issue where, and I think that's the biggest issue for a family, right? Property taxes. So you have a situation where the state can put in billions of dollars, and so many times the effect of that's going to be small, maybe $150, $250, $300. A lot of people won't see it, but of course people are going to see it that are on a fixed income. But the issue arises where the local authority just goes and increases your appraisal. So they're basically clawing that back on what we did. So I really believe if you really want to help people out in Texas, I think there's a lot of things you can do. But one is really looking at the way we have this appraisal system set up, because I really think that the majority of a family budget, if you look at their yearly budget, aside, groceries, gas, and any other expenses that may arise, a lot of it goes, if they own their home or buying their home, goes to their property taxes. So we have to figure out a system to balance it out and provide, of course, the tax funds for the local entities, whether it be at the city, school, county, and state, but at the same time, not tax them out of their homes, because appraisals keep going up, and I find myself having to battle them every single go-round and have to do an election protest and try to get those things reduced. But I see that a lot of my constituents don't do that, either don't know how to do it or just don't do it, and it's causing everything to continue to go up. So I think that's something that we really have to look at. And my personal opinion, if we're going to give Texans some type of relief, especially having to deal with inflation, I think it's really that's what we need to focus on.
People are also being affected, also economically with the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the state of Texas does not have a state-specific minimum wage. Currently, it's $7.25, which is set by the federal government, due to the state not having a state minimum wage here. Do you support creating a state-specific minimum wage? Yes, I support minimum wage going up, but if you're looking at the way the economy is right now, employers are having a hard time getting employees. So I'm thinking just the evolution of the way the economy's been changing. I've heard the stories where businesses cannot get employees to come work for them, and they're naturally increasing the amount of money that's being offered. $7.25, it's incredibly low to raise a family. It is even to support oneself, and things change. And just the way you see inflation, we really have to kind of look at where the economy is, where we stand in respective to other states. Because Texas is a big state, and kind of see where we're at and make sure we don't get left behind, because maybe that $7.25 can negatively affect the Texas economy, where now you're having employees not being able to get in employers, because employers are like, just, they pay $7.25 in Texas, why would I go to that state? Those are things we have to kind of look at. So I definitely support increasing it based on the supply and the demand and where the economy is and with inflation. And I think it's naturally increasing, because I'm hearing some of these positions that may have been minimum wage positions, several months ago, if not years, have increased because employers cannot get employees. Touching on that, there seems to be labor shortages throughout the entire country, not just Texas. What do you think? Why do you think that is? And what policies do you think you can institute?
So I sit right now on the Texas Community College Finance Commission, and we're trying to redo our funding formulas for community colleges. The reason I think that's important is several years ago, there was always a big push, when I was in school, to go and get a 4-year degree, right? That was incredibly important. I think what's happening is a lot of individuals have done that, and you're starting to see a decrease in a lot of the trades, right? Whether it be, carpentry, plumbing, electricians. So you're finding shortages in trades that are incredibly important. And that's, part of the issue that we have right now, right? I think as a state, we have an obligation to constantly change, to look at where the market's trending, what are the important jobs of tomorrow, whether it be computing, whether it be, digital stuff, which is incredibly important. But we can't forget about those trades, because you need a plumber, you need an electrician. Like, those trades aren't going away, and a lot of these individuals that have worked in those industries have started to age out. So I think the state, from what I'm seeing and what we're working on, is we're trying to adapt and understanding that a four-year degree is great and it's very important, and if you look at the numbers, you're going to make more money in the long run, but life is changing. Things are getting more digital. There's new jobs that we didn't foresee 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Industries are coming into Texas and they're telling us, hey, we can hire X amount of workers, but this is what we're looking for. So we're trying to develop programs with our local community colleges, and having programs developed where somebody can go in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, and have a high-paying job, many times paying more than what a four-year institution would pay. That's helping those jobs, right? And then we have to not forget about the trade jobs, which are in shortage. We need more employees. We need those jobs filled. People are aging out. People are retiring. So we need to make sure we balance that out. So I think there's just a shortage for various reasons. But I ultimately think that you're having these jobs developed where you don't have the workforce because it hasn't been developed, or we've been stagnant on really pushing folks to go into those jobs, and now we're seeing an issue where people are retiring and aging out of those industries, and we just can't fill them up.
Continuing with education, education is the great equalizer. What is your main priority on education policy?
Well, I think first we start with teachers. My mom's a public school teacher. Retired teachers are incredibly important, right? Because those are careers, they're not jobs, right? Like, you want a teacher to go in, and you want those men and women in those positions to devote their life to that profession, right? Because what they're doing is they're basically educating the youth, which are basically going to be the community leaders of the future, and are going to kind of keep all of us, in check. So to a certain extent, I always like to tell young children that we have to make sure that we provide for them. That job is a very demanding job, being a teacher. They're overworked and underpaid, and I think we need to incentivize the profession. Now, there's been legislation that has been passed. If you hit certain benchmarks, you could theoretically make six figures, right? If you do X, Y, or Z. But I just think we need to do more for the teachers at the local level. I think we need to incentivize the best, and where we've lost a lot of good folks to private industry, I think we need to keep them there. So I think you start with that. You make sure that we provide for teachers and we pay them more money. Same thing. The next thing we need to work on is making sure that we have all the adequate resources that classrooms need. You hear these stories where teachers have to go ahead and take out of their money out of their pocket in order to provide supplies for their children in their classroom. That shouldn't be necessary. I mean, we need to make sure that we provide for classrooms adequately, and we need to make sure that we're constantly adapting curriculum for this ever-changing world, right? Making sure that we're teaching what's going to be incredibly important for these young people once they graduate from high school, right? That's something that we need to work on. So just kind of looking at it, the way things are changing, pay teachers more money, making sure they have the proper resources in the classroom, and making sure that curriculum's also adapting. And then we want to give them the flexibility too, right? There is benchmarks, there's federal standards on, STARS tests and it having to be, implemented. But you want to give a teacher the flexibility to be able to teach, right? Teaching for a test may help you reach a certain benchmark, but at the same time, are you truly helping that young pupil in the future, right? And to what extent? So there's individuals that aren't good test takers, and that shouldn't dictate, what options they have. And then there's teachers that prefer to test, maybe to teach some type of curriculum that may not be so geared towards a specific exam, but feel that they're kind of hindered by just teaching for the exam. I mean, that's something that we have to really look at, and making sure that we give them the flexibility to be able to teach whatever they feel may be important to those young pupils.
Are you in favor of ending the STAR test?
Look, I'm in favor of benchmarks because I really want to make sure that children are learning what they need to learn. But at the same time, I don't support teaching for a test, where many teachers feel that they just have to teach for that test. Now, I can tell you this, based on my recollection, just doing away with the STAR test would be incredibly difficult because I think there's a federal component to it. So it wouldn't be something that would be done at the state level. There'd have to be some federal support where they would have to remove that and allow us to not do that. I definitely think where curriculum needs to develop, I guess teaching for a benchmark is great, but we have to give the teachers the flexibility. So that's really something where the state needs to work with the federal government, because the federal government has say on that test, right, and on those benchmarks that need to be reached, and kind of seeing what the future of education looks like for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and seeing what we need to do to work around that.
You know, teachers are really stressed out, and a lot of it can be attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic, just being overworked, and a lot of the issues that you brought up as well. But if reelected, how do you plan to address these issues that teachers may have? You know, I mean, there's teacher shortages from K through 12. You know, what do you plan to do to address those issues?
I think we need to incentivize the profession, whether that means, you know, a better schedule, more pay, just to get good individuals into the classroom. And then once we're there, we really need to focus on retention. We need to make sure that we do whatever we can to keep those teachers in the classroom and teaching, and have that passion, and make sure, you know, they continue to educate, you know, all Texas children. And then the other issue is we need to take care of them when they retire, right? You know, teacher retirement isn't where it needs to be. We're constantly changing and evolving, but there's been a lot of retired teachers that have reached out over the years saying we need a, you know, cost of living adjustment, right? It's really hard to get into this profession, and then you retire from the profession and then living on this fixed income. So what we need to do as, you know, as a state legislature and as a state is we need to focus on making sure we, you know, one, always fully fund their retirement, and then look at giving them a cost of living adjustment to make sure that we, you know, take care of our retired teachers once they go and, you know, devote their lives to those children for decades. We need to take care of them on the back end, and I think doing that will incentivize the profession and make sure we get the best and brightest to go into that classroom.
You know, college students also seem to be very affected. You know, the cost of tuition continues to rise. It outpaces inflation. You know, if reelected, what would your plan be to address the increasing costs for higher education?
You know, we really need to look at the whole system and the way it's set up. It's just so costly to get a 4-year degree, and what it's doing is it's putting students in debt when they get out, and they're very limited on where they can do, because a lot of times they take jobs based on pay versus what they really want to devote their lives to. Really looking at what we can do in the form as a legislature, providing more grants, providing more access. I understand, you know, the state needs to do their part, making sure we do our part, but at the same time making sure that we look at the institutions, hold them accountable, making sure that they just get their needs versus their wants. I mean, it's costly to educate children, but more importantly, you look at the cost to live, especially if you leave, like for instance, like I went to the University of Texas, you know, the tuition is one thing, right? It's the cost of living in Austin, which is another. And all that needs to be balanced out. So we need to make sure we focus on affordable student housing, right? That needs to be a priority, whatever grants are available. And then with this whole digital era, you know, books. I mean, books shouldn't cost what they cost, right? Figuring out a way in order for us to maybe go more focused on a digital platform on books, and making sure they're at a rate where students can afford, because a lot of times, you know, a lot of their money goes to books, right? We look at that, and then seeing what can be done, you know, via digital, right? And that should decrease the cost, because now we don't need as much classroom space, right? Now, instead of offering, you know, having those 3 classes and having the lights on for those 3 or 4 classes, now you can maybe do 1 in person and then do 3 digital, and figuring out a way to do a hybrid system. Those are all things that I think can decrease costs and things that we need to do. And I think that's the silver linings of the pandemic. It forced us to kind of advance in a fast format to that.
Representative Longoria, I appreciate you being here. Would you like to take a moment to kind of just address your constituents and talk about what your platform is going to be?
Sure. My name is Oscar Longoria. I've had the honor and privilege of representing House District 35 for over a decade. I was born and raised in South Texas, went to La Jolla ISD, went to the University of Texas at Austin, and came back, and I'm raising a family of 2 wonderful little girls, age 7 and 11. The district means a lot to me. I was born and raised here. I've seen the growth and expansion over the last 10 years. Thanks to redistricting, I picked up new areas, South San Benito, Santa Maria, Los Indios, a little bit of Brownsville and Old Mito. And I look forward to working with those areas and continue to develop and progress the district. I ask everyone to go vote. It's incredibly important. Me, as a member of the legislature over the last 10 years, I was able to provide over $10 million in funding for my communities, whether it be in the form of grants for parks, grants for libraries. We were also able to develop the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley in conjunction with my colleagues in order to merge the UTB and UTRGV RGV to form the institution and form ultimately the medical school and provide funding for them. It's something that I want to continue to work on, and I want to provide opportunities for all residents of South Texas, especially for those ones of HD 35. So I urge everyone to go vote, and please re-elect me to be your next state representative for House District 35. Thank you.
Mr. Longoria, thank you again for
appreciate it.
being
Thank
here. My name is Francisco Jimenez for The Monitor and myrgv.com. I'd like to thank Futuro RGV, the Battalion Citizens League, and the League of Women Voters. And thank you for joining us.